Yeah.
So before we get into the specific topic at hand,
Yes.
you wanted to go into a wider general topic of some observations on reform that you've made?
Yes. No, no, no. What I really wanted to do, when Sean and I were discussing what's new happening in the news cycle. Are we going to talk about the same old? And I guess Talking Point is known for doing much more than that, and so we want to maintain that standard. So the latest thing that is in the news and is worthy of consideration, and from my point of view, even more so because it's the Revenue Authority, Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. And the reason why I feel competent to even speak to it is because when I was in government as a Minister of Finance, I was not the instigator or the author of looking towards a revenue authority. It started from in 2002 with the Gordon Dean Committee. At that time, he was president of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And that committee had looked at what were the failings or what were the weaknesses of the position in terms of taking two departments. So first of all, I should say that the Revenue Authority is an integration of Customs and Excise and Inland Revenue, Board of Inland Revenue. So it's two. It's not just Inland Revenue, it's the Customs and Excise. So they did look at it and they made some very pointed criticisms. But as minister, I was responsible for setting up let me just say this first. One of the reasons why we pushed hard on the Revenue Authority, as we did with the Gambling Commission and the FIU, was at the time when we were in government, the Prime Minister made it very clear to me that we had a requisite 3/5 majority. Why is that important? Because certain laws require a 3/5 majority because it may be seen to infringe on constitutional rights. Industrial Relations Act comes to mind easily. So he was very adamant about pushing those types of legislation. Why were those legislation important? Because the approach is there, and I'm speaking from a personal authority now, so it's not somebody came and told me, and people can disagree with me, but no, they're free to disagree with me. But as the Minister of Finance, obviously, I will work very closely with the Prime Minister. And his approach, among other approaches, yes, he had his Minister of National Security, who had his role, Attorney General, and some of which overlapped with my responsibilities. And in terms of the legislative agenda, because I think my focus, certainly in my ministry, was on the legislative agenda. And that legislative agenda, which was the Prime Minister's approach to dealing with the money laundering and the drug trafficking in our country, not just boots on the ground and all Anaconda and all those other things, which he was part of, yes, I would agree with that. But he had taken a more scientific approach to it, and what I think what he was doing was creating a very holistic approach, a sort of a Chinese wall on different levels. So national security dealt with their part, Attorney General dealt with her part, and I had to deal with my part. So what was my part? The FIU. I won't go into too much detail, but I want people to understand a little bit because they speak, and obviously I don't think that this government is enthusiastic about letting people know what was being done. The Financial Intelligence Unit, which we had intended, because I was then still the minister, we were not putting a Trinidadian, we were not putting a Caribbean person, but we had the Washington, I met with them to bring us somebody out of either worked in Central America or Latin America who had successfully set up an FIU, because we understood the realities of the politics of small countries. So that was one of the things that was going to be done. The Gambling Commission, similarly, and not surprisingly, there were members within my own cabinet who were very much against closing down the gambling and came up with various prescriptions, all of which would not see the end of what was called private member clubs, which were really casinos. which we have seen a proliferation of. And because we had a 3/5 majority, there were provisions in that legislation. I can mention just one very quickly, was that we would not need to get your permission to come into your establishment to determine whether or not you are carrying out activities that were in breach of the laws and the criminal laws. Under the current iteration, which does not require a special majority, they cannot enter those premises without your permission. They have to then, if you do not give them permission, get permission from a justice of the peace or the magistrate, sorry, and it's only then. By which time, of course, you know, nothing beats having prior notice. So that does not need any more 3/5 majority. So that was another one of the legislative moves that we were proposing. Another one was the procurement legislation. And it is just ironic. I just have to go through this for you to understand that this was not just vai-ki-vai. It was not vai-ki-vai. Maybe you felt it was vai-ki-vai, but it was not. The procurement legislation, it was on a Monday, I think I had Mr. Lalman on another show, and I was even surprised that though most of the regulations that were required in order to bring the legislation into force had been passed and had been enacted, he said to me that Section 7, which deals with the key, what contracts are not subject to the monitoring by the procurement regulator. That part had not been proclaimed, and neither, I don't want to say with surety Section 23, but the disposal of state lands, that had also not been proclaimed. So it was business as usual. Thursday morning, by Thursday, they decided to proclaim it. But guess what? There's no regulator, because Mr. Lalman, who's an obvious choice to continue at least for a year to guide the new regulator that they may have chosen, his term of office came to an end in January. He had a 5-year term. You knew it was coming to an end. So now you have now proclaimed, but where's the regulator? So that's about 3. And one of the things he said as we were ending the show, which kind of surprised me, and I told him that the other day, that he's very self-effacing, very, you know. And he said, at the end of the show, he said, you know, there's no point passing the Procurement Regulation Act, the Procurement and Disposal of Property Act, unless you pass the Campaign Financing Act, because they're intertwined and interrelated. It is the same persons who would finance your campaign or other ways of financing, which we will not go into, that are the ones that will affect, I need that project for X, Y, and Z, because I have contributed X, Y, and Z, and that's my return on investment. And so he said, and that law, nobody's talking about it. And this brings me finally to what I said that I would speak about this morning, but I just wanted to say what I said, just to put things in context. And I am in a position to do that because all those pieces of legislation came under my ministry, and I was directly involved in all of them because there were only 2 ministers, Minister of and Minister in, which was Mariano, and he was State Enterprises. So I was right. So I was directly involved, and I got my instructions from day one from the Prime Minister, and he made it clear to me that we had a 3/5 majority. So this was the time
now
to be coming out.
But now, you of course, now we could get into the specifics of the Revenue Authority.
Right.
But I do believe, and one of the things that we want to get into is that there were some changes between then and now, because a lot of time has passed, and we've seen that with procurement, and we've seen that with other things. In part, one could say maybe because they don't have 3/5 majority. But, you know, one must ask questions about other motivations.
Precisely. I mean, one could say in fairness, as you have said, some of the legislation does require 3/5 majority, and certainly the current government does not have that. So without calling names of anyone, I was told that there was very much a dilution, I use the word dilution, of those many pieces of legislation in order for them to be able to pass. And one of them was the Gambling Commission, where you have, right. But the one that I was most, very much involved in was the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. Now, as I said, I am not the author of it. It started in 2002. A former minister in the ministry was the one that was responsible for it. But I did take it over, probably took it over with a vengeance, because I was very aware of the 3/5 that was hanging over my head. So we had a board. A board was appointed to assist in, how we were going to set up this authority. And the key to the authority was this. As much as the Gordon Dean committee focused on things like deficient HR resources, inadequate employee compensation, inefficient system. But these are the things that we were really, because I'm telling you this, things that we were really concerned about. I'm not saying we weren't concerned about those other things, but we were very concerned about the inefficient systems for internal investigation and enforcement, and the high incidence of corruption and corrupt practices. We were very much concerned about that, and we were very much aware that a lot of that came from customs and excise. And yeah, we were very much aware of that. I mean, I'm seeing it as it is. I think I'm in a position to say that. And what was very noteworthy to me was when I went on site to the Ministry of Finance, and to let you know the background, they went from 2002 to 2021. No mention about what happened in 2010 when the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Act was passed in the lower house, but then the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament because he called an early election.
Right.